We need to talk about your weak points. In the last video, I talked about the big five. The 5 major lifts that I focused on with my clients and myself in my own training in order to get as big and as strong as possible in the simplest and most efficient way. And I'm going to be doing a deep dive into that in next week's videos. We talk about strength standards, programming, all of that. But for right now, I want to address this. See, I've been getting a lot of questions about what to do on your off days. That is the days where you don't have a workout planned or you're not in person at the gym. You might be at home doing active recovery, things like that. Now, this is the perfect time for you to focus on those little body parts that might not be getting enough work with your big movements. I'm going to give you a general list today of what those body parts might be and to find out more specifically what your weak points might be in your own training. All right, to find your weak points, there are 3 things we need to consider. There's physique, there's performance, and there's pain. You can find your weak points just by looking at your physique. So just by taking a 360, taking a look at kind of where your muscles are bulging, where they're lacking, and what you want to improve. So if I look at myself in the mirror right now and I think, my shoulders are not as proportionally big as my arms. Maybe my weak points are in my shoulders, kind of the side delts or that rear delt to get the roundness. That's physique, appearance, aesthetics, whatever you want to call it. And that one's a little bit more cut and dry, and it's also a little bit more subjective. You might look at yourself and think, my biceps need work. But someone else, maybe a bodybuilding coach, looks at you and think, yeah, you got no quads. So you have to be a little bit careful with that one. Now the second one, performance. This is where you take a look at your individual lifts. Let's say you look at a certain strength standard and you realize that your squat is proportionately stronger than your deadlift. In that case, it might be so that your hamstrings and glutes are weaker than your quads and your anterior chain. So you want to work on hip hinge patterns instead of squat type patterns. That would be a performance discrepancy. We want to be as well rounded as possible. So we want to take a look at the weak points that might be affecting our numbers. And the third thing is pain. Now this is pretty obvious. If something hurts, if my shoulders hurt, if I go overhead, that means I have a weak point that's causing that pain. Of course, there are situations in which we can't train out of pain. If you have a legitimate injury or you have a structural imbalance, something that you were born with, there's not a whole lot you can do with it in terms of training. But I am of the firm belief that most of the time, I'd say 95% of the time, you can train your muscles out of pain if you do it the right way. Now, lucky for us, there are some common weak points that cover all 3 of these topics. And what I mean by that is we can make a couple of assumptions. There are a few key muscles that will never stop giving you benefits if you continue to train them. You can't overdevelop these muscles. Some muscles you can. I would argue that you can overdevelop the front delts, maybe even the biceps. Those can get too big proportionally for the rest of your body, such that when you do certain activities, you have an increased risk of injury. Now, for the opposite cases, these are muscles that if you continue to develop them, they can only make you stronger and healthier. Now, there's 4 main ones, but the big caveat that I want to mention here is that you may be different. If that's the case and you're working with a coach, ask your coach, where am I weak? What do I need to work on? If you don't have a coach, you can analyze this for yourself, or you can contact me and I can be your coach. I would love to work with you. But if you're just working by yourself, you can assume that the following 4 muscle groups are your weak points. Those muscle groups are, in no particular order, the rear delts, the triceps, the glutes, and the hamstrings. Now these 4 muscle groups are of the category that I mentioned before. They can never stop making you stronger, healthier, and a better athlete. And they cover all 3 categories of physique, performance, and pain as well. The rear delts contribute to that round shoulder look and can just make your upper body look awesome. Someone with well-developed rear delts undoubtedly looks better than someone with undertrained rear delts. At the same time, the rear delts contribute a whole lot to shoulder stability, making it easier to do movements like the bench press and the overhead press, as well as things like rows and all your pulls, and they even contribute to stability on a squat. And last but not least, they contribute greatly to shoulder health. If you have underdeveloped rear delts, it's really, really easy to have overdeveloped front delts that can contribute to cracking, popping, pain, and just general discomfort. So you want to make sure that you're training all heads of the shoulder equally, but I put extra focus on those rear delts. The triceps are similar. Being that the triceps are 2/3 of the arm, they are going to contribute the most to arm size. Also, it is very important for pressing exercises to have strong triceps because a lot of times that is what's going to stop you whenever you get to the top end of a bench press or an overhead press. Pretty much any pressing exercise, triceps are paramount. And lastly, if you have really strong triceps, you can protect the shoulders from excess damage. One of the things that I learned from Matt Winning is that usually stronger triceps equal healthier shoulders. So both of those play hand in hand. Moving to the lower body, the glutes everyone's favorite muscle. I don't think I need to argue that having bigger glutes is better for aesthetics. Obviously, you can go overboard with this. You just have a freaking dump truck. It's disproportionately large compared to the rest of the body, but no pun intended, an overdeveloped gluteus maximus will always look better than an underdeveloped one in terms of aesthetics and health. Now, for performance, glutes are absolutely key for any hip hinge, lower body, or even upper body exercise when it comes to stability. Try doing a 300-pound overhead press without strong glutes. I'm telling you, it's impossible to stabilize the weight. So glutes, I don't even have to talk about them when it comes to lifting weights and being athletic. Sprinters, jumpers, all of them have well-developed glutes. And pain, a lot of times with the lower back. If the glutes are underdeveloped and weak, put a lot more pressure on the spine or on the erectors. So tweaking the back, throwing it out, things like that. A lot of older people would be better off with more well-developed glutes when it comes to the risk of falling. So for longevity, you don't get much better than that. Finally, for the hamstrings, you can reasonably assume that your hamstrings are weak because most of us don't like to train them. It's not a muscle that you can easily see or pose in the mirror, so a lot of people just don't do them at all. You might do some deadlifts or some hamstring curls here, but it's very rare to see someone actually going at it hard on a glute ham developer or a reverse hyper or something like that you can hit the hamstrings with. But I would argue that the hamstrings do contribute to the physique in a pretty big way, just because for the lower body, a well-developed quad without a well-developed hamstring looks funky. Something about it is wrong. It almost looks malnourished or something. I'm not sure the best way to describe it. But when you have that sweeping hamstring that connects into the rest of the leg, something about that just looks super cool. For performance, similar to the glutes, if you want to be an athlete, you gotta have strong hamstrings. For deadlifts, squats, good morning, sprinting, jumping, whatever it may be that's connected to the posterior side. And for pain, if you want healthy knees that don't give you trouble when you're walking up or down stairs, you gotta train those hamstrings. A lot of people look at the quad when it comes to knee pain, but most of the time, like I said before, overdeveloped quads are predominant, so we want to train the back side just as much or more than we train the front side of the leg. Hit all 4 of these body parts with a little bit extra volume per week, and I promise you, you will make progress with your physique, your performance, and your pain. Now, on to the exercises that I would have you do. As far as equipment goes, we can go a couple of different routes here. I personally would opt for resistance bands. You can do either the looped bands, that's just like a big rubber band all the way around, or you can do the bands that have handles on either sides. Doesn't really matter, I'm gonna show you ways to do these exercises with both. Some of them require anchor points, some of them you can do freestanding, but the reason I like resistance bands is because of the accommodating resistance. It gets more difficult as you pull and less difficult when it's loose, so we get a very unique application to each exercise that we're doing. We get a lot of blood flow with these exercises. We can do very high reps without doing too much damage to the joints. In fact, it's very therapeutic for the joints, ligaments, and tendons when we do these exercises the right way. Now, I want to mention that our goal isn't to destroy our muscles in these workouts. That's what the bigger lifts are for. Those are for actually training the strength. Right now, we're just kind of giving a little bit extra love to our weak points. So rep ranges, sets, I'm not going to give you specific numbers. What I personally like to do is 4 sets of 25 to give me about 100 reps total for each exercise or each body part. First, let's start with the rear delts and work our way down. The simplest exercise you can do is band pull-aparts. And what I like to do is just take each end of the band here, hold it right about shoulder width apart, and then I'm just going to take it all the way back and squeeze the back of my shoulders at the end. Pulsing for a second and then coming all the way back down. Obviously you can do it with a little bit more tension. It's going to be harder to go here than it is to grab way out here. But just pick something that feels good and then crank out your reps from there. Another good option here would be a face pull. For that one, you need an anchor point. Loop it around something, take a step back, and you pull towards your face. Squeeze, and then extend. For all of these, we're focusing on blood flow and restorative time under tension. For the triceps, there's 2 ways we can do this. One is overhead with something we can loop the band around. The other is with the band underneath our legs. I personally like overhead a little bit more just because it feels a little bit better than the kickback variation, but either option is good. After 25 reps with a decent amount of band tension, triceps really start burning. Now for the glutes and hamstrings, it gets a little bit tricky. I'm going to show you 3 exercises here, one for the glutes, one for the hamstrings, and then one for both if you don't have access to the other 2. 2. Starting off with a seated hamstring curl, this one you need something to loop the band around near your feet and then also something to sit on. This is what I usually have my clients do just because you can get a little bit better of a stretch at the top and you can crank out a lot of reps. If you don't have something to sit on, but you do have a band and something to loop it around, you can do lying hamstring curls like so. In that same position, you can go into glute bridges or single leg glute bridges, which you don't need any equipment for, which is nice. Now, if you don't have something to loop the band around, or you just want to hit the hamstrings and glutes at the same time with a banded good morning. That is done by simply just stepping on the band, looping it over the top of your head, and then performing a hip hinge like so. You want to be careful on this one. You're getting a good stretch in the hamstrings. You're focusing on keeping the core tight. This is a fantastic exercise for strengthening the deadlift pattern or improving your squat. So those are the general exercises that I would prescribe for a client if they were wondering what to do on an off day or on a day they just want to hit those weak points, maybe a little bit faster of a workout. And you can change those exercises. It doesn't have to be those specifically. You can change the weak points if there's something that you would rather work on. And you don't have to do 4 sets of 25. That's just what I personally like to do. I feel like I get a really good pump doing that, and I usually feel better after the workout than I did going into it. And that's the goal. I promise if you're watching this video, you probably have at least one of these weak points. So start hitting workouts like that on your off days to target those weak points, and I promise your physique will improve, your performance will skyrocket, and your pain will disappear. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and stay tuned for the next video in this series talking about the Big 5 and my strength standards for each. Can't wait. I'll see you there.